Hello and welcome to the Game Dev Local Podcast. I'm your host, Oscar Clark, he, him, and I am on a podquest to learn everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by Ivan from Gamevestor. Ivan, tell us about yourself and what you do.
Hello, so I'm Ivan. I'm the president of Gamevestor, a French-based company operating in Europe. So just a little bit about myself. I have more than 14 years of experience in big tech and gaming, Amazon, Google, Electronic Arts, and 2.5 years ago, I met with my co-founder to start a video game studio. But yeah, we'll come to that in a second, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking about kind of the funding processes of games. I mean, I think one of the things, particularly the last couple of years, there's been a squeeze in terms of how game teams can get funded. And if you're an indie, if you're a mid-size, or if you're a larger team, funding is how we make the game work. And for me, I think what's interesting is trying to get that commercial mindset, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make games for players. We're trying to make experiences that players love. But if we don't consider the commercial realities, how are we going to get folks like yourself helping us working out how we're going to get our funding? So given your kind of history and your kind of background, I mean, what have been the kind of the biggest challenges you've seen teams facing when they're starting to ask the question of how am I going to get this funded?
Sure. So I can go back to the story, right? So 2.5 years ago, I met with my co-founder Arthur, and we had this idea, to create a video game studio. So we had the concept, we found the team. It was quite good. We had very positive feedback, and after a few months, we went to look for funds, right? So we contacted publishers, VC, and very quickly we realized that it was just no, 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 which was a bit weird given the fact that we
Tumbleweed.
had. Exactly. And we had colleague a few months, years before that, raised millions just based on a pitch deck.
Yeah.
So we're a bit confused, right? And a few investors told us, too bad, your concept was quite good. You should have, if you would have been here 2 years ago, you would have left with your money already. And we heard that like 3, 4 times.
I've
And
heard that so many times, I don't
that's weird.
believe it.
Yeah, no. And that's how we came up with the concept of Gamevestor, because we realized that there was an issue in the funding for video games today.
Yeah. So before we get into that, I mean, the way I want to explore it, I'm thinking about kind of the different vectors. So I think there's a first stage, which is I think the teams need to get their act together, and for my mind, that means thinking about what you're building and who you're. In fact, I don't actually say it's not even what, it's why you're building this game. And to my mind, to work out the why, you've got to work out who the audience is, what you're trying to deliver, what the success looks like to you. But I find quite often we have indies who think, "Oh, I'm going to make this game," but they haven't really thought through a why other than I want to make a game. Does that match with your experience? Or I mean, it sounds like when you were doing it, you had something in mind, but you couldn't get the resonance. Is that? I mean, what do you think?
Sure. I mean, we had like the market, we had the right audience, we did market studies, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure it really matters anymore, right? What publishers, what VCs are looking today, it's all about the metrics, right? The
Yeah,
traction, the initial
yeah,
traction. So sometimes you will you think that the game you're making right now will perfectly fit the right audience, and then you get no traction. On the opposite, sometimes you just do a crazy project, crazy side project, and it takes off just because it's brand new, it's very creative. All of a sudden, there is
yeah.
a new audience for that. So it's very difficult for studios today, especially for the small indies, because
Mm.
they don't necessarily have the tools, right? We're already asking the indies to be game developers, to be managers, to be so many things, and now they need to
Marketeers.
be market experts
Yeah,
and marketers and financial experts. I mean, yeah,
yeah.
no, that's we
It's a
live in
lot.
tricky times. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you mentioned kind of like sometimes things work out, and part of the Falls VC group, which you're for for those listening, we are both part of a venture group called Force VC, who we're very happy with. Well, at least I am. I'm sure you are too.
I am.
And another part of that kind of group of developers is a team that's creating a game that's coming out tomorrow at the time of recording, called Roadside Research, that somehow managed to get 500,000 wish lists, which is an incredible number. In fact, I think I literally just before we started recording, I happened to see a post on LinkedIn that they got onto Belgian news, which is kind of, I think, crazy. But why I'm mentioning that is because sometimes you're going to hit the zeitgeist. You're going to get that magical kind of moment, but I don't think it's safe to assume that you will ever be that person. I think those things happen when you've already done all the hard work. I mean, that particular team, they worked incredibly hard. They had a decision to make, and they decided to try and launch a game within a small number of months. What an incredible feat of effort to get to the stage where you get that. But I think when you're a developer trying to run and work out how you're going to get funding, you've got to work out where are the grants, where are the processes, but even then, even submitting to a grant, I think you need to be able to say, I've got evidence of why this game is going to work. And that seems to resonate with what you said earlier, that you were being asked continuously, what's the proof? What's the proof?
Yeah, no, sure. Today it's very difficult to just come up with a new concept. You need to get funding, right? You need to go out there, test your idea, test your product with the public, with
Yeah,
a brand new audience to see if you can get early traction. I'm thinking there is this game Minsk.
yeah,
It's from a Polish dev, I believe, and they just created this prototype. They posted videos on TikTok, and it took off. And I think that's one of the ways to reduce the production cost here. Is you try your concept, you see if at least visually it works. That can be one way. There are many other ways to do that, but today it's crucial to start somewhere before launching the production, testing the idea, testing the concept to
test,
see if
test.
there is interest.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in fact, I did a talk at Peak Pocket Gamer talking about validating games. I think the title was "How to Kill Your Game," yeah, and I'm joking. I'm joking, but I'm also not, because I mean, one of the things I think about that we have to think about as developers is our job is to have a hypothesis that we test. And to your point, the earlier we can test it, for example, for me, if I can pull together a video trailer before I build the game, fantastic. That's not the end of all my testing. If I'm going to make a live ops game, I'm not going to rely purely on the first video that I put out. I'm going to want to then get it in front of people. I'm going to try and work out, do they install it? Do they still play it? And I suppose what I think's going on there, if in my head, is understanding the level of risk you're willing to take as a developer, but also how much budget do you have before you need to get funding? I think that's an important. Is it? I mean, do you think is that an important factor as well?
No, definitely. And I think the most important factor of all is to have a clear roadmap from the very beginning. You
Yeah,
need to be like, okay, I need to test that first, with the audience, the concept, with my, let's say, just the concept with friends, family, and then I try to create a trailer if I can. I know how
yeah,
tricky it is. And then I try that, on TikTok or whatever. Then I create this demo, very basic demo, and I try it again. I mean, and then there is the Kickstarter and
yeah.
everything. Now that Kickstarter is a marketing bit more than a real way to get funding. So you need to
I was
have
going to
this
say
roadmap,
yes.
and it's complicated, right? Because I have many studios coming to me, and they already have a game that is half finished, and they're
Yeah,
looking for big money, and they want. We're still in this mindset. Many studios are still in this mindset of, okay, I have this game, I need money to finish it, and then you take care of the marketing and everything else. And I believe this era is over for like 95%
Yeah,
of the game projects, right? You need to do so many things by yourself now,
yeah.
and it's good and bad for the studios.
Completely. I mean, I think we've had a really particularly tough few years. I think everybody knows that. We're not going to go into that again. I've done enough podcasts on how terrible things have been. However, I am also somebody who did manage to raise funds doing a Kickstarter. And Michael, who's the European guy at Kickstarter still, um, he is always incredibly interesting to talk to. But, like you say, it's a challenge for what is the role of a Kickstarter, and I don't think everyone's going to be as lucky as my nephew was. Not lucky is not the right word. My nephew worked on the Dark Souls board game back in 2016, which raised like 3.5 million or something. He was a community manager for it at the time.
Nice.
And you think about those big things did happen. In fact, they still do to an extent, but they're typically teams that have a machine that know how to deliver their existing audience on that platform, who know how to provide the offers, the incentives, the engagement, and have the trust that they'll actually deliver. And I think that's become an important part of what makes a successful Kickstarter is you've had successful Kickstarters. Is that fair?
Sorry, I didn't
Uh,
understand the question.
One of the things I feel like in order to have a successful Kickstarter, you have to have already had successful Kickstarters.
Not necessarily from
Okay.
what I've seen, because we're also working. I guess you know the guy Thomas Bido, who is
Yeah.
a crowdfunding expert. He's one of our advisors. So there are multiple factors, but you already need to have a successful Kickstarter. You need to have an established base, and you also need to
Exactly.
invest
Yeah.
in ads. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not as it used to be again, right? It's not as easy. Now you need to be much more prepared if you want to have a successful Kickstarter campaign. And once again,
Yeah.
Kickstarter is good at the beginning to actually show there is an early community and grow it. But this is
Yes.
just one of the steps, unless you have the Dark Soul license and then you get 3 million. But
Yeah.
it's to us, we see that as one of the first steps in the long way to get the final funding.
And you mentioned Thomas, and anyone who doesn't know, ICO Partners, Thomas Bido, fantastic guy. For me, he's like somebody who's been there and done it enough times and knows the tricks and techniques and the things to avoid. And so it's people like him who can kind of supercharge people who are coming at it fresh. So you're right. I think you're right. It's not that you can't still do it. It's that it's a challenge and you've got to go with your eyes open and know how to be ready to respond. I always joke it's the least money I've ever had for the most effort. But
Definitely, but it's kind of for some studios it's kind of a mandatory steps, right? And
yeah,
you need to be resilient, and you need to be prepared, and you need to accept the fact that
yeah,
at some point you may need to do a Kickstarter, and it's going to be difficult.
yeah.
But this is just
And
one
it is
milestone.
possible to do as a free to play game. I say that as someone who did, but don't.
Yeah,
It's
it's
very
even harder.
challenging. So we talk. Yeah. So here we are. We're talking about like here's some fundraising. I talked about some grants. You talked about Kickstarter. We've talked about having to pitch to various teams. Now, obviously, typically people are going to pitch initially to angels or friends and family. I'm not a big fan of friends and family, but mostly because none of my friends and family had lots of money when I was growing up. So um, I may have a top hat, but it's the short one. It's the working class one. It's not quite true, but you know what I mean. The I'm being very silly. I'm sorry, but the key thing is that some people can have access to funds, and great for them, fantastic. And it, but sometimes you have to stick in your sweat equity. Sometimes you have to find ways to make possible to get to the point where you've got the minimum viable element. Now, not necessarily a full game, but the minimum viable element to be able to communicate that this game has legs. I mean, what have you seen in terms of the kind of like? Because I'm always amazed by how far indie teams in particular get without having any funding. I mean, do you feel the same way, or do you feel like it's always a challenge?
It really depends on the structure. So we've seen like from solo dev to big teams coming to us, and
Yeah,
it's, I want to say, a bit easier for a solo dev, right? Because then your costs are quite limited.
very low.
We've
Yeah,
seen a lot of indie teams that are now half of the time focused on doing some, side projects for other companies, some development work.
yeah.
But yeah, we've seen many cases. We've seen also studios that got big funding at the right time, and now it's drying up, and they are a bit like, what do we do?
Scary.
So yeah, no, there are many,
Yeah.
but I think nowadays the studios that are still up and running, I want to say it's, you're either resilient or fairly young with a very lean team.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, to my mind, the biggest challenge is again come back to this thing for me is knowing what success looks like to you, and knowing what risk you're willing to take. And in terms of risk, because not everybody in the team can necessarily afford to be out of work for a period of time. And if you end up creating a work behind a studio by accident because you've got to get work to be able to pay for the development time, quite often you suddenly discover the skills of a work behind a team aren't quite the same as the skills of developing IP, I would argue. So I think it's an incredibly challenging thing to do. But now we've got a game. Let's say we've got our team and they've got their game and they're looking for funding. Um, what part is Gamevestor trying to fulfill in this pipeline?
The end of the financing chain, right? The one
Yeah.
that is the missing chain today, the one that is really broken in the industry. So I would like saying that, you can come to us with just a concept and we'll get you the funds. That's not how it will work. You need ultimately to convince people out there, because we're a platform. The studios, they come to us,
Yeah.
and the players, the investors, they come to us as well to invest in game projects. The thing is, the players, the investors, they won't necessarily have the knowledge that we too have, and
Yeah.
they will need to be convinced. They will need to see a good trader. They will need to see a demo, because then they can, test a real product.
I
I
want to
think they can
play.
understand. They want to play. I think they can understand that, given the fact that early access is in the mainstream, they can
Yeah.
understand the product won't be finished. But we are, yeah, we're on this. We're positioning ourselves on the last mile. I want to say the biggest chunk of funding, the one that will allow you to finalize your production and go to market.
But I think it's an interesting one because I get the language you're using there, and I think you're absolutely obviously I get where you're coming from, but I do think there's an element of like I maybe it's my cynicism. I see people needing finishing funding as well, and to me, finishing funding is a secondary stage. For me, what I think again, what I see you guys doing, and I think really well, is this is the point where we can get serious, but it's an alternative channel than having to go down the I've got to get this VC backing, I've got to get this angel backing. And I think a lot of games aren't really suited to a VC model. So
Yeah.
just before I'm going to come back to you to describing how game investors work, but if you think about an angel model, that is a personal interested group, probably somebody who has some history in games, I would argue, who are going to put their own money into your game. Now, why are they doing that? Is it because they believe in your game? To some extent, but also because they want to get a payoff. So when you sell your game, when you make money, they're getting something for it. Whereas a VC, they're wanting to see 10x, 100x return when your game succeeds. And they want you to be part of a portfolio of games where they know 1 in 10 are going to really pay off. Maybe, 8 of them are going to fall flat on their face. And that's the kind of odds that you're dealing with. To my mind, if we bear that in mind, when you're looking for funding, grant gives me some money, investment, equity investment is going to get some of my long term value. Where does Gamevestor sit into that?
And let's not forget the publishers.
Oh yeah, the publishers.
I've
Sorry, yeah, good point. Good. I mean, tell me about publishers.
and they work with the rev share. And fun fact, less and less VC today are working with equity. They are more and more
Mm,
interested in rev share as
yeah,
well, right?
that's
And
happening. Yeah,
to come back to your first point, angels, I think they are becoming they are becoming extinct. I want to say, right?
I have a little bit more confidence because I have friends of mine in the UK Games Angels, and I think that they're still very keen. Maybe not quite as active as some of us might like, in the sense of like there's only so many of them. But I think that's looking little bit more healthy than it was a couple of years ago.
So, let's say angels. Anyway, I
Yeah.
think they come at the very beginning of the project, or at least
Yes.
the first phase,
Relatively early. Yeah.
right? Relatively early. VC and publishers they position themselves at the second half of the project when the
Yeah.
project is already you need to today can't really go meet with VC or publisher without a vertical slice without some
Yeah.
traction matrix, right? So this is where Gamevestor position itself. We want to be ultimately the number one source of funding for middle-sized studios, right?
Yeah.
Those are the ones that are involved today by VC and
They've been
publishers,
squeezed and they've been squeezed and they've been squeezed over the
and they've been
last, maybe I
squeezed.
would say 10 years. The
But
the the double A, the middle game, even though they can be very profitable, they've been squeezed by the top end, the triple A's eating their lunch, and the indies, just being able to chip away without there being funding. How can a middle level team actually succeed?
and if you put that in perspective, it's a bit, it's annoying. Let's put it that way. That we only have as a mid-sized studio, you only have two ways to get funding. It's either VC or publisher, and if both say no, what do you do? That's why we thought there is a big market to take here. If especially if you're a studio you that already has traction, right? If you already have your
Yeah,
community, why and fan that really love what you're doing and that are willing to put some skin in the game, no bad pun intended, why would you bother going to get bad conditions when you can leverage your community and use Gamevestor as a
yeah.
tool?
Exactly. And I mean, you talked about publishers, and I'm thinking about that because um, the revenue share models tend to be quite hard, not because necessarily um, the balance model between you and the publisher necessarily, but the publisher has to bear in mind that they're going to be bringing on a number of different games, and they're going to be putting a lot of effort into supporting, overseeing, guiding, marketing, promoting, etc. Those teams, and not all of them are going to succeed. So again, that kind of matches why VCs have to have their models, I would argue as well. So I think your point here about being able to find, I think this is a massive space where the ability to be able to find a way to help empower teams that have experience, that have the capacity, that have the understanding, but are currently almost blocked from. Well, they're not able to access the same level of funding they may have done many years ago.
Yeah, no, and I think we can still be compatible with publishers and VC,
Yeah,
right? Because we don't take any equity, we just take a rev share. And I want to say that half of the publishers we talk to, they are willing to try a model. I want to say the other half is like, no, I cannot share my revenue.
yeah,
It's my revenue percentage. It's out of the way. I cannot work like this. But I think a lot of publishers have understood that there is a real need for a funding mix
yeah,
that isn't here yet. It is
100%.
happening, and I really hope we will be one of those tools, right? But having just one player who will fund an entire double A, it's not
Well,
real
but
anymore.
there's more than that. I think that with the introduction of things like fractional marketing teams. So I'm thinking about people like Not a Shark, who basically work as a publishing team, essentially providing all the marketing channel, etc., etc. They can work with a double A team, and they can make basically supercharge ability to get that
Mhm.
game in front of an audience. And smart bunch of people who've got great history working with in the larger publishers know what they're doing. I work with them myself, but they're just one example. There are others. Other marketing type groups do exist, but I think the point is that the route to market is still very flexible, more flexible than maybe some people think.
More
Steam
flexible than
market,
ever.
PC
So
market. Yeah,
yeah, no, definitely. You mentioned Not a Shark. We're also
yeah,
working with Radical Theory.
yeah.
I
Radical
think
Theory, absolutely perfect example.
it's
Yeah,
this mix, right? Now it's just not one player who will do everything, who will give you all of the money and take
yeah,
care of the rest. And by the way, less and less publishers today are doing proper marketing when they are
yeah,
handling a game. So I think it's smarter for the studios to not put all of your eggs in one basket, to have multiple sources of funding, and also work with those different agencies. So it's more work. You need more headcounts internally because you need people who will talk
yeah,
to those different counterparts. But at the end of the day, you really have people that are more, passionate and more involved in making your game succeed.
yeah,
Right?
yeah.
I've
I
seen
think that
that,
matters.
and it does matter.
Mm.
Once again, not sharp or radical theory. You can see what they've done in the past few years, and it's
That's
great.
great. And again, I think that what we're describing here is that you're effectively empowering a different way of looking at the funding model, but it unlocks these other gateway. I mean, we still haven't even got into the flow of how people engage with you, which we should do, because I think the key thing here is I think it's a useful thing whether people work with you or not, to know that tools, like the platform you're building does, to know that they're out there is an important factor, because it allows us to understand that there are different ways of building routes to market. And you know for the teams that have an instinct around social media, they have an instinct around the use of working with streamers and so on and so forth, that have an instinct to work with specialists or fractional groups, I think that can really unlock a huge amount of potential. So I have a game. What do I need to bring to you for you to be interested in putting my game on your platform?
So a good concept, a good pitch deck, some early metrics, especially traction,
Yeah,
and then we check the game. We see if there is market potential.
but you need a playable, don't you?
Not
Or do you?
necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's obviously better if you want to ultimately convince the
Yeah,
players, the investors out there, but we don't necessarily need a playable depending on the seniority level of the team.
I
Of
see what you're
course,
saying. Yeah,
if it's a brand new team with no demo and just a
yeah.
few slides, won't work.
Hey, I mean, personally, I think so. I have a whole bunch of like approaches I try to recommend to people. For me, I'm not a fan of the vertical slice. I hate the vertical slice. I think it's a terrible idea because no one knows what a vertical slice is. Everyone's got a different answer. Also, I think what hyper casual taught us was build the smallest thing. And if you build a vertical slice, you're building all of the core systems before you know how they're going to work, or that any of them are going to work. Again, I know I'm being a bit radical, but forgive me. But what I do think is having something which, like you say, trailer, great. Having something that is playable and to a certain extent repeat playable. Well, from that we can get a cost per install, and we can get a day one retention. If I can come to you with a day one retention and something that you can play enough to know that you could play it the second day, and hint at what day 7 looks like, and hint at what day 30 looks like, assuming it's a repeat play game, or at least hint at the arc that the start, middle, and end could pay off. I think that, to me, shows that you've got a core that can be built from. You've got a good understanding of where you're taking this concept, even if you maybe only got 3%, 5% through the journey of delivering it. Is that matching what you're thinking?
It does, but I would simplify it even more. I would say the trailer, because we all know what will matter in the end will be the trailer,
Yeah,
and the seriousness of the documents that are being sent over, because we review everything, and the pitch deck, the financial documents. We ask for a lot of documents because
yeah.
we have to, right? And you'd be surprised at how many studios don't fill those out seriously.
Yeah. So, I mean, so what am I getting when you've said yes to me? So my feeling is it's not quite a we're not talking about really quite a Kickstarter per se. I don't know if it still exists, but there used to be a thing called Cedars, which was, I don't know if it still is, but there was a kind of like actually I think maybe uh yeah, I think it got acquired, but the idea was that it was a way of getting, in that particular case, equity, but on a more crowdfunding style model,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering correctly. So what's happening in your space? Once you've seen it, you've said yes. What happens next?
What happens next is that we negotiate together the terms of the revenue share, right? So
Yeah,
we have, like in the industry, pre-recoup, post-recoup.
yeah,
During the pre-recoup, the biggest percentage goes to the investor,
yeah,
and during the post-recoup, the biggest percentage goes to the studio, but it
yeah,
stops 18 months after recoup. And the
yeah.
rates that we are proposing to the studio, they are much lower versus what you would see in the industry in general.
Sure. So essentially, what we're saying is you're fixing a kind of value in terms of revenue share that then the investors are going to get the benefit of. Is that fair?
Yes, and we're doing that with the studio,
Yeah,
because the studio, when we show we have a big simulator, and when
yeah,
we show it to the studio, they immediately understand that, oh, if I want my game to be attractive, I need
yeah,
to have an internal return rate that is at least 30%, 40%, right? Because
yeah,
it's a risky project.
yeah,
So I need to increase my pre-recoup, decrease my post-recoup. We discuss that with the studio. We do not impose that to the studio.
yeah.
We need to make sure that everybody is happy, right?
So, I mean, in that process, I would assume that the developers already worked out in their pitch deck what their roadmap looks like, what their costs look like, what their budgets and their plans look like. So I think they're already coming to you with an estimation of what value they think the game is going to have, what costs they think the game is going to have, um, and then they're going to translate that into this pre and post recoup percentage. Is that right?
Yes, and we also discussed those numbers because
Hmm.
a lot of studios, they will tend to have higher numbers to get more from a
Yeah.
traditional investor. Let's put
I'm
it
going to
that way.
make $15 billion.
So because we have people within the company that are my co-founder, lead
Yeah,
producer, right? He knows the cost of things. I
yeah,
will know the cost of a proper marketing campaign
yeah.
on my side. So if the game
But
is asking for 1 million, I'll be like, no, 50K is too low for a marketing campaign. You
100%.
should work, you should discuss with this agency and this agency. You see what they're saying and you check the budget, you come back to us. So there is a lot of back and forth when we try to have the best final proposition in the end.
Mm. But you say that when you spend this much on marketing, how many times do people have actually thought about doing any marketing?
Actually, quite often,
Okay.
but
They must be
most
getting
of the
better.
time
That's
it's
not
too low.
normally, it was the other way around for me. Eh?
Yeah, but most of the time it's too low.
Yeah, it's always. I mean, don't get me wrong. I actually think sometimes I find when I've so obviously I've done a lot of consultancy. We did a bit of publishing back in the day. Wrong timing. These things happen. But what I found was a lot of people underestimated what the game could make because they felt like they had to be very cautious. And I don't mean that they were wrong. I mean more that um, they took assumptions on the way that they built a model, which didn't necessarily match the recoup that they would need to achieve to justify the raise they were trying to make. And I think that balancing, you sound like to a certain extent, you're incorporating that process of this is what you're going to have to deliver in order to satisfy the returns needed for this level of investment.
So we don't phrase it like that in the sense that we won't say to the studio, you will need to deliver that many units, because
Yeah,
we one of the key things we're asking for is comps, right? We'll
yeah,
check
yeah, yeah,
the performance of similar titles from the worst one to the best one.
yeah,
And this is one of the other things we agree together on. It's okay. So obviously, having your game in the top sellers of all time is not realistic. Let's try something maybe in the middle, or in the first half we try to be a bit more pessimistic
yeah.
in order for projections to be as realistic as possible.
So, I mean, let's say we've got our game, we've worked out our percentages, um, and we've got a game of trainer, we've got our plans, we've got our costs, we've got our percentages, we've set what we're aiming for in terms of a raise. Um, what's the next step on the process?
So the next step, we sign the paperwork
Yeah,
and we launch the campaign. So
okay.
the campaign, we have a first phase with gaming angels, right?
Yeah,
They position themselves before the public,
yeah,
and then we launch the campaign, and we do spend marketing money to promote the campaign. So we take care of
gotcha.
that. We ask the studio to also push the campaign to the
Yeah,
community, to as many people as they can. If they can do some extra marketing, that's great. But
classic
we do,
crowdfunding mindset,
yeah,
basically. Yeah,
yeah. But we do spend, we do special ads, and we'll at launch we'll have many influencers who will talk about our games and the platform. We'll see how it evolves, but that's the idea anyway, to continually spend in marketing, promoting the game, but for the platform.
yeah, yeah. So at that point, hopefully everything goes well, and we start seeing, the in the angel stage, we see like a certain proportion of the money coming in, and then when the goes out to the wider community, we start seeing that number racking up. Hopefully, we get scale, we explode, we get viral, blah 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 blah. We get lots of things. Now, um, what's the kind of levels you would tend to expect in terms of that early angel stage? Is there any kind of like indications of signal that you're getting in the angel stage which might affect the way you look at what to do with the later update?
So what we've seen so far, we launched in early access with the Angel a bit more than 48 hours ago. We already have a project that is 10% funded. I
Yeah,
think having projects that arrive between 10 and 30% funded before going to the general public is what we are looking for. That's
yeah.
the
I can't remember
good
what the
sign.
numbers were on Kickstarter, but I think when we were doing it, it was something like you had to have like 40% on the second day or something like that. I can't remember what it was to be able to have confidence you were going to hit things. And we just scraped by and just managed to scrape by in the thing. So maybe that was fine. Um, so there are some signals that can. Would there be a point? Let's say a game. You've negotiated some numbers. You do the angel release, and it knocks it out of the park, and you realise that you've undervalued valued, quote unquote, the game in the process, would that open a point where you might reconsider before you opened it up to a wider public?
We have multiple objectives, right?
Yeah,
So one of our first game is starts. The first objective is 350K,
yeah,
and top objective, we have five objectives, and the last one is 1.5 million. So it's kind of a test for us. We'll see how it goes, right?
yeah,
But if the game reaches the maximum amount of investment,
yeah,
there is not much more we can do just on the investment part, because we also do some crowdfunding for the rest of
yeah,
the world, right? Investment is only open to European citizens,
yeah, yeah.
but people can still contribute in crowdfunding.
Of course. But that's the thing, isn't it? This is the difference between what you're doing and maybe just a not plain, a Kickstarter type thing. We're talking about investment in the game as opposed to you have a stake, revenue share based, sure, but it's still a stake in that project, which is different from effectively a pre-order, which is
Yeah.
essentially what most crowdfunding would be. Okay, so we've got our 1.5 minute or whatever the number we've got is. We get all that cash, we run away to an island and have a great party. Oh wait, no. So what I loved, you talked to us about this a while back, and I thought it was really interesting. You seem to have a really smart way of dealing with the distribution of the funding. How, or do you want to describe how that works?
Sure, it's like in the industry, right? It's by milestones. So we don't give out all of the money at once to the studio. We That's again one of the other things we agree on with the studio before signing everything. It's the number of installments
Yeah,
and the milestone associated to it. So let's say we have four milestones. We'll give the first milestone when the campaign ends, and then based on objectives, based
yeah.
on the milestones that we can easily control, let's say an early access, for instance, we will release the money.
And it's an interesting one because I have so many debates over what's a good milestone. And I have tended to go away from the idea of a milestone. I think in this case it makes sense, but for when I was publishing, my interest was more about KPIs. I wanted to know that your milestone was based around a deliverable we could measure based on a player moment. But in practice, trying to pull something like that off in this kind of context to me seems way too complicated and hard because it's too hands on. I mean,
Yeah.
the approach that we were taking was very hands on. That's why that made sense. But for me, I mean, just even in this crowdfunded context, to have some set of, I have to have delivered this in order to unlock this funding, that to me might puts a rocket behind the team. It kind of says, I've got to be meaningful. I've got to be. It's not just a case of, like, I mean, to be fair, I love Kickstarter. I buy so many things on Kickstarter. The proportion of things that I never get delivered is remarkably low, actually. I'm very lucky. But I don't mind because of the context. Those that have never been delivered mostly have been, completely legit. There was obvious attempts to do it, obvious pain in the team. In fact, I worked on a project which we couldn't deliver. So, these things happen. But for my mind, the fact that this is giving a frame for those teams to deliver against, that to me seems a powerful cocktail.
No, and I think it's better for everybody, right? It's reassuring for all the investors. And it's also aligned on the financial needs of the studio, because keep in mind that if you receive at once 1.5 million, you need to pay taxes on those, right? So having money released by milestone and easy milestone. I have the studio
Yeah,
came up to me with like 15 milestones, and I'm like, no, no, no. We need something that is easy to understand for the general
yeah,
public, and also something that doesn't put too much pressure on you. So yeah,
exactly. It's got to have that balance, isn't it? And over promising is so easy to do.
yeah,
Under delivering, So easy to, and if you had the kind of KPI type approach I was taking, you could very quickly run out of money. And we weren't funding. The funding was separate. We were saying we can't release until it hits a certain level of performance, and that's why that's a different beast than this. And I think this is a incredibly sensible way to do it, keeping it so that the teams know what their goal is and they can deliver against it. And importantly, the value comes in the quality of what they deliver, and that is how they're paying back their investment to their investors. So, with all that in mind, I think this is great, and as you know, I've said that to you already. The having this as another string to the investment bow, I think, is an incredibly interesting thing. I think it's also interesting how compatible it is with other models. For example, by you focusing on the revenue share, if they're working with an angel that's taking equity, that's a different beast. It's a different vector. That's only going to get paid out when they sell the company, essentially, for want of a better model, no, description. Um, and the idea that they can still get grants, they could even potentially, I presume, go do the Kickstarters of this world as well.
No, I think we're 100% compatible with Kickstarter, right? And
Yeah,
we actually sometimes encourage some studios that are
yeah,
very early stage to do so. Like, okay, you go to Kickstarter, you test your concept, as we were discussing earlier,
yeah,
and you come back to us 3, 6 months later, right? We actually have a game
yeah.
that did so. So it's once again, you have several milestones, you have your journey. We arrive at the end, we position ourselves at the end
Yeah.
ish of this journey.
And I think what's interesting about that is that what it's saying is that we can start thinking about in an integrated way how we reach out to users, how we get them to be excited about our project, how we can leverage the Kickstarters of this world and grant funding to get the enough money to get the level where we can start being able to do this for real at the same time as building and generating interest, community, engagement, endorsement. And then when we're in this kind of pipeline, we're having less of the constraints we might have if we went down a traditional publishing route, less of the constraints, or at least the bar is more manageable than it might be if you were going to a VC. And altogether, we can take the energy and the power we've generated with the work that we've done to set up the process to maximize the benefit of this kind of route.
No, definitely, it's again, it's a journey, right? And
It's a
you need
journey.
to actually leverage what you're doing throughout this journey to build your strength, to build your community. So at the end, you have more financing option. You can work with us as well as a VC in parallel.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that is more and more recommended, not only by me but by the professionals of the industry.
Mm.
The old model of having all of your eggs in one basket is over for most studios.
And honestly, I feel the pain because I've been through this journey in every aspect of it so many times. I'm lucky that I work with people who are focused on that, and even down to we introduced a system which I think some other people are doing, which is to look at leveraging debt or at least using data to drive debt-based marketing funding, where you can fund your marketing through the KPIs as your backup of what you're trying to deliver. So there's so many new variants, things like using in the UK we have the VGTR, so the video games tax relief. I think there's different types of tax options that you can play with in, for example, Belgium. So there are understanding what are the full spectrum of tools available to you and using them efficiently, I think is really important. With all that in mind, with this conversation that we've had, what's the one thing you'd like people to take away from them about, what's happening in the funding scene for game developers?
Hang in there.
Hanging in there.
Uh, no, but more seriously, I would say you need to. to be prepared. You need to be resilient once again, right? And it's going to be a tough journey, but if you follow the steps, you can make it. But you need to be comfortable with the fact that you will likely not find just a single investor anymore. You need to
Yeah.
multiply the sources of funding.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And for me, it's a case of I think that we have to focus on validating what we're doing at every single step. And the more we can validate, the more we're willing to effectively try to prove that our idea is wrong and learn from the lessons that comes out of that. The problem I have is that too often it's so easy to just explain away, oh, we didn't get that KPI because of this. Well, if you didn't get that KPI, there's something wrong. Fix it or change it or do something different. Stop making excuses. I mean, again, I don't want to be unfair to game developers because it's a creative process. We put our hearts on our sleeves, but every time we do that, we learn something new about a game mechanic. And if we have our game design, our creatives strongly felt but loosely held, and learn and validate when we next sit in front of an investor, when we next create our crowdfunding pages, when we next have our conversation with our angels, we will have more confidence, more weight, and more solidity around the idea, and we prevent ourselves getting hurt later.
It's an iterative process. You need to test, fail, learn, test, fail, learn, and you build on what's successful. You continue, and that's how you move forward. Especially, as you've been mentioning, like free to play game or mobile games, it's crucial.
Oh, it's a fun space to be in right now. Ivan, thank you so much. If people want to find out more about Gamevestor or about yourself, what's the best way for them to do that?
Gamevestor.co, and we have our FAQ, and you can always reach out to the team. We have a Discord, right? So the link to the Discord is on the homepage. You should have all the needed info. So go to gamevestor.co and create your account.
Fantastic. Evan, thanks so much. And so this has been your Game Dev Local podcast. We've been talking about kind of the funding process and a new route that's been introduced through Gamevestors to basically leverage this kind of crowdfunding model, but in ways that are smarter and designed to allow us to get access to the funding that the middle-sized teams require. Because that's the future, being able to have these layered ways of looking at funding our games, to be able to derive success by understanding what we're delivering and why, and having the proof that it's going to work. Hopefully you enjoyed that. If you have, please like, subscribe, share, follow all the other juicy things that we like you to do. And don't forget that Ivan's got a Discord for Gamevestor, but we've also got a Discord for the Game Dev Local folks. So ask us questions. Tell us what you think. What are you doing to ensure that your game gets funded this time? On that note, thanks again to Evan, and we'll be back next time on the next stage of our podquest.